We've seen this before. The past is present, and the warning signs are here. The stakes starts now. Welcome to The Stakes. My name is Michelle Kenny. I am co-founder and chief creative at the Seneca Project. My illustrious colleague, Tara, is traveling this week to warmer and sandier places. We miss her, but I am honored to be here by myself, well, at least for this minute, with you for this really special and deeply personal episode of The Stakes. Tonight, we're going to be talking about authoritarianism, how it survives, how it spreads, and what happens when we stop paying attention. But this isn't just going to be about policy and news, but this is going to be about family stories, about memories and survival, and about what we make out of history when it's real and it's very human. So we can recognize the warning signs in our own lives before it's too late. But before we get into that, I have some good news. Our American Girl ad, which I know you all love, has been nominated for a WEBBY award. We're super, super excited and we're so proud of this. It's really such an honor because, the Seneca Project has only been around since last June. And, Tara and I started this by ourselves with our own money, with no help from any other organization, just some really wonderful people, and of course, all of you who've been so supportive of us. So this honor and this nomination belongs to us, but it belongs to you as well. So it's a celebration of women's strength and freedom, and we hope it continues to resonate long after today. So we'll be dropping the voting link in the chat throughout the show. We would love for you to vote for us because there is a WEBBY's People's Voice Award, which is all about voting and all the people coming to support us. So I'll drop that in the chat and it'll also be in the description as well. So without further ado, I'm going to play American Girl right now as a lovely reminder. And thank you again to the WEBBY judges for nominating American Girl.
Women's suffrage is a long story of hard work and heartache crowned by victory.
Was it so hard being an American girl?
Women throughout the country are committed to winning these rights for themselves.
Was it so hard living in a first problem world?
I'm Connie Chung, CBS News, New York.
When the American promise is the land of the free, but I'm waiting for the bill for the air that I breathe. Was it so hard being an American girl?
I do. I pray that we all remember our children are watching.
Every heart beats true for the red, white, and blue. Tell me, girls, what are we gonna do? Every heart beats true for the red, white, and blue. Tell me, girls, what are we gonna do? Every heart belongs to all the free, white, and American girls. What are we gonna do?
While I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last.
Every heart beats true for the red, white, and blue. Tell me, girls, what are we gonna do?
It never gets old. Everyone, please welcome my wonderful friends, Julie Roginsky and Anna Scheumann. They're two extraordinary women who I'm so grateful would join me tonight. Julie Roginsky is a Democratic strategist, author of Salty Politics Substack. She is co-founder of Lift Our Voices with Gretchen Carlson. She is also a Jewish refugee who fled the Soviet Union at only 6 years old, leaving behind a family history that was shaped by Stalin's purges and the Gulag. And my other friend, Anna Scheumann, is the granddaughter and great-granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. She manages creative projects and speaker training through Living Links and tells the stories of her grandparents to school-age children throughout the tri-state area via 3GNY. Anna and I have collaborated many, many times over the years as artists, as friends, and now as part of our ad production team at the Seneca Project. She was our lead producer, other than myself, on American Girl. So that was really fun and special to get to have that with you right now. So anyways, ladies, thank you so much for being here. There's a lot going on in the news, obviously, as there always is. I feel like we had a pretty good day on Tuesday. Wisconsin showed up. We had some margins close in Florida. We had Cory Booker on a 25-hour speech in the Senate. I know Julie has said many times, I've heard her over the last couple of days say that Tuesday was really a shift in mood and vibes, giving us a little bit of hope. But I wanted to talk about some of the more concerning things that are going on in this moment in our history as Americans, and how it pertains to the stories of you and your families. So Julie, if you'd like to go first, I'd love to hear just a little bit about your background. If you'd like to tell our audience where you come from, all the things you've learned, and what brings you here today.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's so great to be on with you and with Anna. Before I even get to my own personal story, let me just say that I have been working as a political consultant for 30 years. And I just want to tell people that the American Girl ad that Anna and Michelle and Tara created this is no exaggeration. It is the most poignant, best ad that I have ever seen in my 30 years of working in politics.
Thank you.
It's, when you think about what this country is about, both the good and the bad and the inspirational, that ad encompasses all of it. And it's just remarkable. And so I truly hope people do go and vote on the WEBBY website. And that's not a shameless plug for you. I truly
no, thank you.
Yeah, I believe that it deserves it. So thank you for creating that ad, because from the moment I saw it, it brought tears to my eyes, and it still does. It does.
It's same every single time. I'm like, I've seen this ad like 150 times, 200 times, and every time I get choked up, every single time. So thank you, Julie. That's so kind. I appreciate it.
So prior, many decades before I started working in politics, I was actually born in the Soviet Union, and I was a Soviet Jew, which back then was effectively like being a Black person living in the Jim Crow South, with all the segregation, all the occasional lynchings, all the discrimination. It was a very, very difficult way to be, and it had been that way for generations for my family. If you know the phrase "beyond the pale," for instance, a phrase that we use in the English language that referred to the pale of settlement where Jews were allowed to live, which was basically the Jewish ghetto. They were not allowed to live during the Russian Empire in the cities. They were not allowed to really live among non-Jews. They were not allowed to have jobs that people who were Christian, or Russian Orthodox for the most part, had prior to the Soviet Union being established. So a lot of Jews, when communism came to town, were excited, not because they necessarily believed in the economic theories behind communism, but because they thought eventually it would have some sort of equalizing force for them, because the czars had not been good to them for all those generations. My great-grandfather was one of them. My great-grandfather was very close to Leon Trotsky, who was a horrible human being, but was one of the founders of the Russian Revolution. And my grandmother has, before she died, but told the story of when she was a little girl, Lenin coming to their apartment, meeting him, kind of him dangling on her being dangled on his knee. So, we kind of came from a family that really was bought into the Russian Revolution and all of it. Until Stalin came to power, and he and Trotsky had a huge rivalry. For people who don't know, Stalin had Trotsky murdered with an ice pick to the head of Mexico. That's a whole separate story. But my great-grandfather, was among the tens of millions of people who were apprehended and then ultimately sent to the Gulag and shot. In his case, he was shot on Stalin's personal orders because Stalin wanted to purge and Trotsky influence. That all happened in the 1930s. At the same time, my both my sets of grandparents lived through World War One, World War Two in the 1930s. My grandfather on my father's side sent to the Gulag for a decade because he was a religious Jew and he refused to work on Saturdays. And back then they had 6-day work weeks. So he spent 10 years in the Gulag, came back a broken man, and did not live after he came back. That's my dad's father.
Right.
His wife, my grandmother, was a doctor and almost got murdered in the Stalin doctor's plot, which was a plot where Stalin was convinced that the Jewish doctors were going to kill him. So he was going to kill all of them. And had he not died precisely at the moment that he did, she would have died as well. So, it's a very long, I'm giving you all this history, I think.
No, it's great.
It's relevant to what's happening now. I'm not comparing what's happening now yet, but just to give you a sense of people idealistically, I think, thinking they're supporting something better and then kind of reaping the win of what ends up happening to them.
Right.
I was raised by my grandparents. When we lived in Moscow, my parents worked, so I lived with my grandparents during the week, and they were basically like my parents. I would see my own parents on weekends, but I was raised by my grandparents. At some point in the 70s, in the late 70s, they all,
Look at you. Look at baby Julie. How cute.
That was me, probably circa 1974 or 75.
That's crazy. Look at you.
Wow. That's me. And holding a book upside down as I see. But they decided, the adults in my family decided that they could not spend another generation raising another child in that country because it was so bad.
Right.
So we all applied to leave. And again, I want to stress my grandparents were the primary caregivers in my life. I was much closer to them than to my parents. But with the Soviet authorities did so well and continue to do so well, and it's so applicable to what we're seeing now with these deportations, is that they specifically wanted to make it painful for people who wanted to leave. They were allowing very few Jews to leave the Soviet Union at the time. They gave my parents and me a visa, but they did not give my grandparents a visa. And they said that effectively, if you go, but no, you will never see each other again. And for a decade, my grandparents tried to get out and were refused. They were known as refuseniks, which was the word for Jews who were refused an exit visa. And every single birthday I had, every single kind of wish I had, I would blow out the candles every birthday, and just my wish, when everybody else was kind of wishing for Cabbage Patch dolls, I just wished that I could see my grandparents one more time. So that's the kind of family separation policies that truly have an effect on people. I mean, this is not some sort of historical artifact. It's not some sort of thing that you read statistically. I mean, this is just one example of what happens when you separate families, when you lock families up, when you have an iron curtain separating the two of them, two sides of the same family. Eventually, my grandparents did come here when I was 16 because the iron curtain had collapsed and they were finally granted a visa out. But, there's a big 10-year age gap between the little girl you saw there and a teenager.
Yeah.
Who, at that point, was just not that particularly interested anymore in her.
Right.
Past.
And you were in New Jersey at that point too, right?
We were in New Jersey. When we first came here, we were not allowed to come here directly. We first had to go to Austria. And I just remember it was a very cold, we left on February 15th, pre-dawn, very, very cold, gray morning in Moscow. We got on that plane. People had come to see us off at my grandparents' apartment, but most people did not come to see us off because they knew that the KGB had us under surveillance. They did not want to be associated with us, which is to this day, my parents can tell you exactly who refused to show up all these years later. And that was 1980. So it's been a long time. I'll remember
Right.
But we ended up in Austria for a little while. Then we moved to Italy, spent some time there just waiting for a visa to come to the States, and eventually came here. And to some extent, the reason I have such a hard time with the refugee policies that are happening now, especially with Donald Trump, is because I had the great fortune of having been born a Soviet Jew, which doesn't sound like a great fortune, but at that precise moment in history, the United States government was letting in any Soviet Jew who could make it over here. because so few could, but they were allowing everybody in and giving them a green card right away.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, if I were born in Venezuela, or I were born in Syria, or I were born in any of the countries where people are literally fleeing genocide at the moment, you know, I would not have been able to come here and have the life I have. And so I think for me, it's a very personally kind of painful thing to view all of this happening right now and just being completely aghast and appalled that this country that welcomed my family and gave us everything we had, we came here with $90 in our pocket between the three of us. The fact that we were able to survive and thrive, and I was able to, you know, give back to this country in the ways that I have my whole life, that so many other people, kids who are desperate to come here are being locked up in cages and ultimately being deported back to places that are dangerous for them.
Well, you know, it's funny, Julie, having been a kid growing up in the 80s, the Soviet Union and Russia, I mean, had a different connotation, a different meaning to kids who were, you know, growing up back here, especially little. I had a pen pal in like 1990, I think. I was in 3rd grade. I had a pen pal in the Soviet Union. I forget the reason why, but it seemed so far away and so smooth.
Yeah.
And I think of even just my own family. And yes, we, you know, I think every family has stories of struggle, especially in different points in history. But to your point, I mean, it's so close. I mean, it is so close. It was not long ago at all. And that, you know, leads me to Anna. She tells the stories. And this is why it's so important. And I know this is your first time on my show with the sirens in the background. It's always a fun time. But Anna tells the story of her grandparents surviving the Holocaust and the things that she has learned from them, and that trauma that really is not only passed down through stories, but in DNA. I think there's science now proving that DNA your DNA is expressing some of the generational trauma that happens. But Anna, if you want to just tell us a little bit about what it is that you do and a little bit about your grandparents.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor, and you know how much I love you, Michelle. And
I know.
Thank you, Julie, for your comments on the ad. That's a high praise. I am just me and my whole team is just so excited to work on it, and we're all so proud of it. You know, like I talk about a lot with students, there's a lot of different ways to be an activist and to make a difference. And people have an idea that you have to be on the street with a sign in your hand. And yes, that is 100% incredible if you do that. But there are other forms of activism, like helping you with your ad. But speaking in schools. So basically through 3GNY is the local group that serves New York metropolitan area, and then the umbrella organization that I also work with, which is Living Links, which trains 3Gs, grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, to tell their story in a way that's that students can find really receptive. Now we say students because we're gearing it towards junior high and high school students, but it really applies to any age. I give the same talk if I'm talking to adults, maybe with a little bit more graphic detail, and it's the same kind of response. And what I would say is that every time, I mean, this is not just my experience, but every time that I do speak, I find that students are a lot more receptive and a lot more intuitive than we give them credit for. And it does give me a glimpse of hope in spite of everything that we are seeing. And when we tell our stories, when I tell my story, it's not just the years of the Holocaust, right? They were whole, entire, and complete people that watched the rise of anti-Semitism before. You know, it started with words. It did not start with ghettos and concentration camps and gas chambers. And then what happened after? How did they put their lives back together and come to this country and start from scratch? So both my mother's parents are survivors, and my mother's maternal grandmother, which was very unusual, she was in her 40s, and that was almost unheard of for a survivor to be that old. That's my namesake, who I'm named after.
Mm.
But my grandparents, they were from Krakow, Poland. Big metropolitan city, universities, people speaking different languages down the street, a modern city. And my Papa Max, like, he would say that anti-Semitism was always present. It was always there. And he saw a steady rise as he got older.
Mm.
But despite that, he would say life was still good and they had everything they needed. And his family, they were practicing Jews, but not particularly observant. They were very assimilated and really part of secular society. He tells this story about how he was working on a Friday night on the Sabbath when other Jews were in temple, and that he was training as a boxer so he could stand up for himself and Jews in the community. They were getting beaten up on occasion on the street. And the older generation would talk about him and his couple buddies that would do this with him. They would say, oh, you're hooligans, and, just don't make too much noise and keep your head down. We've seen this before and it'll all pass. Because, anti-Semitism was irregular, even though they considered themselves Polish citizens, their birth certificates mark them as Jews. They were other. People forget that anti-Semitism, is a racialized form of hate because they don't recognize you as, white.
Right.
Which is something that I think, depending on who you're talking to, they don't forget.
Right.
That
I know you and I have talked about that a lot. Yeah.
Of white supremacy. It's you can't fight white supremacy without fighting anti-Semitism.
Right.
So my grandparents, one of the questions they would ask, like, why didn't they escape? Why didn't they go somewhere? First of all, why should you have to leave your home? Why should you have to leave your family behind? Why should you have to
And
do
who
that?
wants to? I mean, everything you've worked
to?
for your whole lives. I mean, your family, everything your favorite places to eat, your stores. I mean, everything. You're leaving everything you've ever known behind. And it's really an unfathomable thing that people had to do. I mean, they really had no choice.
But after, there were rumors circulating, from Germany, from the partisans, from the underground, that when the Nazi army invaded, they were coming for the Jews first. Mm-hmm. And so Polacks and other Jews actually started walking away from the German border. Like you would see a throng of refugees walking. And Germany would send their planes in low and shoot at the people trying to escape. So he had no choice but to turn around and go back. And by the time he returned home, armbands were mandatory. So the family business.
I have a picture here that you sent me earlier.
That was actually his armband in the camp. He said that when he received, when he went, so first they were in the crack ghetto. And then him and my grandmother were actually married in the ghetto because they told the story many times about how if they were going to die, they wanted to die married. So they got no party or anything, but they got married in the ghetto, and then they were among the last there. And the Krakow ghetto was liquidated, they were sent to the Płaszczów concentration camp, which if you've ever seen Schindler's List, that is where that takes place. And when he was sent to Płaszczów, he said that is when he lost the rest of his humanity. And so that armband was his number, with upside down red triangle marking him as a political prisoner. And it also originally had a Star of David as well on his uniform and on his armband. But after the war was over, he felt the need to try to keep his uniform and his armband, but he said that he couldn't get rid of the lace or the smell, so he burned the uniform. And when he was trying to travel back to Krakow, that he saw a lot of violence towards Jewish people, so he burned the Star of David to try to hide his Jewish identity. So I think there's a lot really to, besides seeing the rise of fascism, having everything taken away and losing the only survivors. He had two first cousins that survived out of a family of a couple hundred people. My grandmother, her mother, and another cousin survived. and that's it. These are my grandparents. They were in the DP camp in Gallingen, Germany.
And just for
About
people
a
who
year
don't, for people who may
after.
not know, the DP camp is displaced persons camp. So that's where they were settled until they were able to go to the United States, right?
Yeah, it's a refugee camp, and they were there
Yeah.
from the time the war ended until my grandfather had a distant uncle that was able to sponsor them to come to the U.S. They came to New York by way of Boston at the very end of 49. So this idea that the war ended and here's my Papa Matt and my Uncle Leon, who was born while they were living in the DP camp. So he was 3.5 years old when they came over. He would never be able to be president because he wasn't born here. But there was there is no going back after an event like this happens.
Right.
You can't snap your fingers and undo it. People's entire lives were gone. Their businesses were gone. Their homes were gone. They were stateless. And they still were not free. There's one of the share with you was a letter that my grandfather, he was in a DP camp in Konstanz, Germany. And my grandmother, who they were separated when they ended up in Auschwitz, the most notorious of all the death camps. My grandmother ended up in Bergen-Belsen. And after liberation, Bergen-Belsen was turned into a DP camp. And so this is a letter that gave my grandfather permission to leave Konstanz and go and retrieve her from Bergen-Belsen. There's this idea that, oh, the war ends and you're free. That was not the case.
Right.
They weren't allowed to move about freely. They weren't, so I think this is always something that I make sure I include in my presentation to students, so you understand that, again, the war did not end and then they couldn't just pick their lives up again, besides the fact that after years of starvation and physical abuse, that a lot of survivors after liberation, they didn't even recover.
Right. And so I guess sorry, keep going.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask both of you, just so these stories of your families and of yourselves, I mean, what does it feel like right now? I mean, I can't imagine what it must feel like watching the news every day and seeing what's going on. And while maybe the marginalized group is being, switched out with every given day about, DEI or immigrants, or, I think that a lot of times the administration's trying to hide behind their, against anti-Semitism, when I would argue that they don't really care about Jews at all. It's really more about, other interests. What does it feel like right now? And especially, like when your families have both had to just make the very hard decision to leave their homes. And you too, Julie. What does it feel like right now to be watching the news and seeing everything that's going on?
I think people need to understand when they think that when they look at the southern border, especially if you watch Fox News. I worked at Fox for a long time, so I watched my share of propaganda about the caravan. The caravan is headed for the border. The caravan is headed for the border. I want people to really take away something that's, I think, lost in these conversations. It is really, really, really hard to go through this. To your question about why, or Anna's point about why her grandparents didn't leave.
Right.
It's hard. It's really, really hard. And I think
and where would you go? I mean, that's another thing. It's like, you can't just up and leave and go anywhere, right?
Exactly. You have to have the need, you have to have connections. There has to be a plan. Like it's difficult and complicated. You needed a visa to come here. You needed a family sponsorship, especially prior to World War II and during World War II. You couldn't just show up at the border.
Right.
I have cousins in France who fled Paris when the Germans got to Paris in 1939. They had to wait in Portugal for a visa from a distant cousin who was living in Pennsylvania somewhere, and he got them over here. But that's the only way they were able to come here. So many other people couldn't, and they ended up at Auschwitz or other concentration camps and dead. So when we think about this narrative about how people just come here because they want to take advantage of this country, because they want to
Right.
glom off the American taxpayer. Like, let me tell you from personal experience, I've always said, short of, I don't even want to say this out loud because it's, the death of a child is so incomprehensible, but short of that kind of tragedy, there is nothing harder that I would ever go through in my life than what I went through when I was 6 years old. And my parents were in their 30s at the time, would tell you the same thing. There's just nothing compares. It is disorienting. You are leaving behind everything you know. You're leaving behind everybody you know. You have no guarantees that you will make it. You have no guarantees that you will ever see the people you love again. You have no guarantee that you'll see the country that you love, even though you don't love it, but the country that's the only country you've ever known your entire life, that you'll ever see that place again. And so it's a horribly disorienting, difficult, tragic thing to undergo. And if you are so desperate as to come here, it means you're really out of options. I mean, these people, in Venezuela or wherever they may be coming from in South America, I mean, they're crossing thousands of miles.
Sometimes by foot,
Right,
which is like even crazier.
Sometimes by foot, spending every last cent that they have to God knows, pay God knows who to come over here, have to risk crossing the Rio Grande, sometimes illegally, not illegally, but sometimes sometimes they don't ask for asylum. Sometimes they do. Not knowing whether they're going to make it here alive. So how desperate do you need to be to do that? And the cruelty, I think, to me, I sit here every day and I just can't believe it. And I think in a very visceral way, I just can't believe that this is who we are as a country, that we're endorsing returning these people to countries that, by the way, they'll be dead because they fled those countries for a reason. A lot of these men fled because they had to be in a gang. They were told either you join this gang or you're going to die, or your family's going to die. So they escaped. They're right back where they started. God knows what's going to happen to them when they get there. These other people who are locked up like animals, it just reminded me of, I hate to use this analogy because it's not quite the same, but like in a boxcar almost. Yeah. In this prison in El Salvador.
Where Kristi Noem is doing like concentration camp theater in front of right. It's sick.
It's sick. I mean, it's sick. That's the only word for it. It's actually morally corrupt. It's like the moral rot is right there for everybody to see. And yet you see people kind of go through their day every day the same way that I guess, and certainly Anna probably can shed more light on this than me, but I just think about like Hannah Arendt, who was a Holocaust survivor herself, who had this great piece of writing called The Banality of Evil when she was covering the Adolf Eichmann trial in Israel, who was the architect of the final solution to the Jewish problem, one of the architects of the Holocaust. And she, the Israelis captured him. She covered his trial in Jerusalem in the early 1960s. And she just looked at him and she said, kind of had this banality of evil. This guy looked very, very normal. Looked like any other bureaucrat. He looked like anybody you'd see on the street. And all of these, I remember being in Berlin in 1993 when there were a lot of still elderly people who were adults during the Holocaust. I was in college then and looking at them and thinking, but what were you doing back then? What were you? And these were all like normal people. And so to me, what are people going to, what are our children and our grandchildren going to be looking at us and saying, but what were you doing when this was all happening? You were just going about your day. You were going out to dinner and having drinks. And I think about that all the time. And it's depressing is not even the word. I'm not somebody who's typically prone to depression, but it's just, I am depressed because I know my history. I've lived it. But I also know the history that Anna does such an incredible job of teaching, which is much worse than anything I've ever gone through. And like these normal people who lived their lives in the 1930s as they were escalating to the greatest tragedy in world history. Yeah. And lived through that while that was happening too.
Well, that's the thing, is that we like to think about, these Nazis or these perpetrators as monsters, but they were people. They were just people, and everything they did was a choice. And my grandfather would say often that it's easier to look the other way. It's easier. It's easier to look the other way and go about your day. And it's easier to follow in the crowd. It is much harder to take a stand, to swim against the current, and to be loud and visible, because that's scary. And I could tell you from my personal feeling is that from the second I saw tiki torches and the chanting of Jews will not replace us, I have had a knot in my stomach. Because for those of you that don't know, the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory is that Jewish people are orchestrating the replacing of white people with non-whites. So that is the basis. And, the talking point, which was, we were looking at those throngs of refugees coming up, the border of Mexico, is that George Soros was funding this, which is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory.
Right.
And, and when it comes to, and it's just, besides the fact that it's just,
well, it's absurd. It's absurd. And Julie and I talked about this on our other show that we like. She's been in politics, Democratic politics, for 30 years, and you've never met George Soros. I've been for almost a decade. I've never met George. Like we get emails at Seneca Project that's like, "Oh, you George Soros, funded operation." I'm like, I wish
I met George Soros. I'd be a lot richer than George Soros. But look,
but that whole Jewish puppet master pulling strings and
evil, not to be trusted,
and
a cabal,
and
the otherization,
all this money and influence. Anti-Semitism is often called the canary in the coal mine, that when a society really embraces these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, that other stuff kind of follow. And I want to be clear that it's not, anti-Semitism is across the political spectrum. Each side does not have a monopoly on it. But when it comes to Trump and his camp, it's just a nice. We're just a political football. He doesn't. Care
no, he doesn't give a shit. And a lot of people,
it's actually worse than that. If I may, it's actually worse than that, because it is the exploitation of Jews, in my mind, to score points on behalf of white supremacists. Because by getting rid of DEI, which is what he's doing this for, what he's effectively doing is giving space to people who are like the Tucker Carlsons of the world and others who I know, because I worked with them, are just, they just are.
Right. Like he legitimately hates Jews. Like there's no doubt.
And the people that they surround themselves with, he's having dinner with Kanye West. He's having dinner with Nick Fuentes. He's having dinner with all these people. He said that the people, to Anna's point, in Charlottesville, there are good people on both sides. Well, no, actually there weren't, right? There just weren't. And to use, I think, the Jewish community in this way, and what's heartbreaking to me is that there are not an insignificant number of people in the Jewish community who are like, right on, let's defund. And I'm not. We've talked about this in our other show before, Michelle. I'm not defending what happened in places like Columbia.
Right.
It was a nightmare for the students there. It was a nightmare for the neighborhood. It was a nightmare for the parents.
I live nearby.
Yeah. It was a nightmare for the parents who paid tuition to only have their kids have to do remote learning because their campus was shut down. So I'm not defending that. But there's a big difference between cracking down on chaos, irrespective of who is causing that chaos, and suddenly saying, oh, but we're doing this for the Jews, because you're not doing it for the Jews. You just $500 million out of Columbia's budget that will disproportionately impact the research projects of Jewish professors.
Yep. And it's the fact that they hide behind it. And Donald Trump, I see it a lot on the right wing, Twitter feeds and whatnot about, oh, well, Ivanka's Jewish. Okay. And then, or Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller's Jewish and Katie Miller's Jewish. I'm like, okay, have you ever
and they
met
were
a
Jews that joined the
self-hating
Nazi Party
woman?
too.
Well, that's what I mean. It's like there's always people in marginalized groups that will gladly do the bidding of their oppressors to seek out others, other means or goals or whatnot. And it's just the cruelty. I keep coming back to the cruelty, and it's just. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the people who are in the Trump administration, around the Trump administration, that is part of this deeply, deeply anti-Semitic, racist, xenophobic group of tech oligarchy guys who are from South Africa. Because I think something that people may not realize is that Elon Musk's mom's parents, so his maternal grandparents, were
May Musk's
parents were Canadian Nazis whose party was made illegal in Canada. So, they decided to leave and go to South Africa because that seemed like an attractive place to go, even though they had no ties to it whatsoever. And Peter Thiel, while he was born in Frankfurt, and I think then moved to Ohio for a second, and then his parents moved to Southwest South Africa, which is one of the last places on Earth that it was acceptable. Actually, let me play this clip for you. This is Chris McGreal from The Guardian, who's telling a little bit about this. It's really interesting. Hold on.
Who are the PayPal mafia, and how are they linked to apartheid-era South Africa?
Well, they're a group of men who are at the top, the founding of PayPal, all of whom in some way or other grew up in South Africa as children. You've got Musk himself, who was born in South Africa and lived there, went to high school there until he was 18 and then moves to Canada. You've got Peter Thiel, who was a co-founder with Musk of PayPal. Thiel was born in Germany but brought to South Africa as a young child. His father was a mining engineer. Lived in Johannesburg and then moved to Southwest Africa, which was then a South African colony, is now Namibia. And he went to school in Swakopmund, which was notorious as probably the last place on the planet where people still openly greeted each other with Heil Hitler and celebrated Hitler's birthday. He went to a German school there before moving to the United States when he was 10 or 11. Musk has a Canadian passport through his mother, because Musk's mother's father was, mother's parents were Canadian, and there's a whole story there. Musk's grandfather, Canadian grandfather, had been the head of the Canadian branch of a political movement in the 1930s called Technocracy Incorporated, which in essence wanted to scrap democracy in the United States and Canada and have technocrats rule the country, which might sound familiar. That becomes a de facto fascist party, is banned during the Second World War, and then the grandfather moves to apartheid South Africa, having had no connection to the place, in 1950 because he likes the sound of apartheid. And even Errol Musk says of the grandfather, he was an open neo-Nazi.
Like, I listened to this, and while it's, you can't even believe it, but it's the grandchildren, essentially, of the Nazi movement who have rose from the ashes and with billions of dollars making an influence to make history repeat itself. And again, here we are, the granddaughters of people who escaped, people who survived, and here we are fighting the same fight again. And they say that history repeats itself every 100 years or so because the last person to tell those stories firsthand is no longer here, and so that story then becomes just a story on a page in a history book, and it's not human anymore. And I think it's I think that's why a big reason why I wanted to have you both on is because humanizing these stories and actually putting faces and voices and spirit to it is so important. And it helps, especially with Anna, when you talk to the kids. I mean, what kind of reception are you getting with the kids in these schools?
I mean, they're it's really incredible, especially when it comes to schools. They'll ask me about intergenerational trauma. They'll ask me if I've experienced anti-Semitism myself. They ask me what my grandparents were like, or, and when it comes to, like you said, like we're the last generation to hear these stories firsthand. And Elie Wiesel had this quote about, when you hear a story, you witness. So I tell them, by me telling you my family story, you are all now witnesses. And I talk about when my parents were like after the war, and I talk about how the older I get, the more I realize how much it really affects every single thing that I think, how I react to everything. Because survivors,
and being a parent too, I'm sure.
Survivors came in two camps: the ones that you could not get them to talk about it, and the ones that could not stop talking. And my grandfather, like, these were literally my bedtime stories, and I did not realize how abnormal that was. And I usually tell the students how, as a kid, I would lay at night, and this, again, I did not think that's right after my 15th birthday. Skills 98. My pop in his styling a red tracksuit, which my grandmother definitely bought. Oh yeah, I bought my
amazing.
Totally lost my train of thought because I saw the picture.
Well, it's you were saying that these were your bedtime stories.
I tell it to the students that, like, I would lay there as a kid and think about if I had to leave really quickly, what could I throw into my backpack? What's important to me that I could be out in 2 minutes? And that my family, we had, like, there was like a meeting place plan, like, my grandparents' house in the Catskills, like the little bungalow.
Even now, even still.
Yeah, it was like, this is the meeting, this is where if something happens, we go, and then we figure out from there. Like, and this is a conversation that I have with a lot of other grandchildren of survivors. Like, we had a plan too of where to meet, and they would, the grandparents that would hide jewelry in clothes and make sure they have a certain amount of cash on them. Like, that's not supposed to be the experience of a child, and that shouldn't be the kind of, but you don't know it's not normal until you encounter people that are like, you do what?
Right. Because because it's such a heavy topic, I think, for people who are so separated and far from it. But for you, it's part of who you are. And also, Julie, you were saying that you have spent your adult life really giving back to the country that you feel like gave so much to you, and how hard it is really to be a person who speaks up. Some of us, it's just in our nature, and we make enemies, or people don't like it. To make a theater reference, I most people think they're Alphaba, but most everyone is a Glinda. You know what I mean? It's like,
I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah. It's very interesting. And to Anna's point, I have said semi-jokingly, but not really, to my husband, who is not Jewish and has had, normal American upbringing, as did his parents and grandparents. So when I've said to him sort of semi-jokingly, well, like, we should probably get out of here because things are getting pretty grim. And I've seen this movie before. And he's like, you're crazy. Come on. This is insane. I was like, no, we should think about, like, you could get Irish citizenship through your, parents, your grandfather being born there. Like, we can figure it out. And he's like, no, that's crazy. And I think from his perspective, like, what are you talking about? Like, yes, things are grim, but it's never going to get that bad. And I've said to him more than once, I go, you sound like a Jew in 1933 Germany, who thinks it's not going to get worse. And, and I hate that I feel that way, because for me, this country's everything. You'll never meet a bigger patriot in your life, precisely because this country's given me everything, because I don't take it for granted. And for me to see the heartbreak of what this country is now becoming, and actually, I hate to say this, has already become in the last 60 days, or 74 days, actually. I've been counting.
Mm-hmm.
But
feels like 70 years.
Years. But that's the part to me that's really terrifying, because to go back to what we talked about earlier, you can't just pick up, right? We have commitments. We have family here. My parents are here. I'm not going to leave them behind. They're too old to travel. I have a 12-year-old who's in school. He's never going to, why? From his perspective, what do you mean we're going to move to Europe? Like, it's not going to happen. And then there's that notion that I think all of us had, and I wonder, Anna, if you have it too, if you're Jewish, or whether it's just me who was not born here and people like me who were not born here, that at the end of the day, there's no place that's safe. That this used to be the place. This was the place that people fled to. But now that this is not that place anymore, where do you go? Where does one go to be safe, especially if you're Jewish in this world? And the answer is, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
I mentioned that earlier to Michelle. Like you, I did not marry a Jewish man, but I married a Latino from South Texas. So he has experienced other forms of discrimination. Not to get too far off topic, but during Trump's first administration, I was pregnant with my daughter. We were kicked off of, with my son, we were kicked off of our health insurance because they wanted him to prove his citizenship.
What?
He was born here. Oh yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, because we had bought our insurance through the exchange, and we were kicked off, and it took almost 6 months of appeals to get back on, because and he's like, I can't prove my citizenship. They're like, we need your citizenship. I have a birth certificate. I have a passport. Like, anyway. But yeah, I feel very much like you. Where would we go? And my grandfather, he would always, when he was speaking to students, because he spoke a lot starting in the 70s, at the beginning, people didn't want to hear the story. They're like, it's over, get over it.
Yes.
And so in the late 70s, he started going into schools a lot. My grandmother didn't start speaking until later, when she kind of realized that if she didn't start telling her story, it'd be lost. But he would always say that this is the best place on earth, and he wouldn't want to live anywhere else, but it has a lot of problems. And how fragile it is, that it could, if it happened there, it could happen anywhere at any point. So he was, he always made it a point to say that we need to be acutely aware that democracy is fragile, that it can go away, that we should never look the other way. And at the end of he gave his testimony to the USC Shoah Foundation. I'm actually there at the end of the video. It was in 1994 in his, or 95 in their house in the Bronx. Like at the end, they ask, what is your message to future generations? And he would say, keep track of what's going on around you, and don't be passive, because passive, that brings tragedy. And so he was very soft-spoken, and he took a lot of long pauses when he spoke, but he said a lot of really profound things that I think about on a daily basis, that we can't be complacent. And
right.
Well,
and also
my grandmother, she was really, there were telegrams like Ray. There was only a file on her. If she was alive now, oh yeah.
well, I've been watching. I mean, anybody who knows me, I love watching documentaries more than I like watching probably anything else. Which might be slightly depressing at times, but very informative, especially in moments like this. And I've been rewatching Ken Burns' PBS docuseries U.S. and the Holocaust, as well as there's another documentary, I can't remember the name of it, about the Nazi hunter who spent most of his life trying to find the Nazis. Yeah, all over the world. And many times people asked him, like, why, like, this is over, isn't it time to move on? And he was like, no, it's never time to move on. Don't you understand? And I mean, and that's just really coming from people who just truly don't understand and maybe don't want to. And it's why people, this is why we say never, never again. This is why. And, it's one of the lines that really stuck out to me when I was watching the Ken Burns docuseries today was that what was happening to Jewish people in Europe was so horrific that they themselves could not believe it while it was happening to them. And they said, if we can't believe that it's happening to us, how are we going to get other people to believe that this is happening to us? Because the crimes are so atrocious, they're so horrific that they are beyond comprehension. And I think, there was somebody shouting at us in the comments that luckily has been banned. Thank you, Mallory. About like, what are these women talking about? No one cares in 1942, blah, blah, blah. Like, you are missing the point. You are missing the point. The reason I wanted to have this conversation, the reason that we all need to be having this conversation is because these things have a playbook and often are inspired by the generation or two before. And it's a level of cruelty that unfortunately happens over and over and over and over again throughout history. And I am not Jewish. I grew up in a small, rural, very white town in northern New York that probably had like 2 Jewish families. I didn't know anybody. I didn't really know very many Jewish people until I went to college, and then moved to New York. Obviously, there's a huge Jewish population here. And then I became very good friends with Anna, who is one of my dearest friends. And I have learned so much from her about this. And it's why I am so passionately allied with my Jewish friends, because I do feel like that it's a group of people that really do get left out of the conversation or left behind, and demonized for reasons that I will never understand. But I want to ask both of you, and I guess we're running out of time here, but I did want to talk a little bit about the what's happening to the students in the United States right now. I mean, it is unimaginable. I was refreshing my memory today about the news stories just in the last 2 weeks of student visa holders who are losing their student visas just because they wrote an op-ed a year ago or they said something about the United States government. Again, it doesn't matter if you agree with them or not. When you step foot onto the United States soil, the laws that we abide by apply to everybody. So I wanted to ask you just like a little bit about that. Julie, I know that there was a scientist as well from Harvard, I believe, from Russia, right?
Yeah, I mean, she didn't even write anything. She had been detained by Putin because when she was in Moscow, because she was a anti-Ukraine war protester. She was arrested, spent some time in jail, somehow got out, ended up going to that's not her.
No, it's not. Sorry. I had the wrong one.
I just wanted to
No, there it is.
But she eventually became a researcher at Harvard, apparently obviously somebody who's tremendously value added to Harvard. And she went to a French, some sort of French conference in Paris. And her professor at Harvard asked her to bring back a frog sample for whatever reason she was doing, which she should have declared, but she didn't.
Right.
Typically, that's her. Her name is Ksenia Petrova. Typically, if you don't declare something, I think it's like a $500 fine.
Yeah, it's like a little fine. You fill out a piece of paper and you go on your merry way. Yeah.
Her case, they arrested her. They were going to deport her back to Russia. She said, "Do not call the Russian consulate about me, because if you do, I will be in prison and in the Gulag within 2 seconds of landing in Moscow." So they've now shipped her off to that horrible prison in Louisiana, where they've shipped off all the student protesters without any due process. And she's awaiting her first hearing, which is going to take place in May. This happened in February. So this woman... And she said, "I will go back to France. I will apply for," they revoked her visa on the spot. "I'll apply for a visa from France. Just please." They would not send her back to France. They literally sent her to Louisiana. For what? For what? And if they deport her to Moscow, which is probably what they're going to do, her life is over. She will be tried in a show trial. She will be sent to the Gulag, and she will spend the next 25 years in the Gulag. So it's beyond devastating. This leader of the student protests at Columbia, with whom I agree on very little. His name is his last name is Khalil. I can't remember his first name. But he was taken off the street. He had not just a student visa. He was a resident alien here. He had a green card, sent to Louisiana. And the reason they're sending them to Louisiana, I just want people to understand, is because the circuit court in Louisiana is very conservative. They know eventually the appeals process will get to that court, and the court will rule on behalf of Trump, they hope.
It's so horrible.
So, I mean, let me tell you, this is the country I came from.
Right.
This happened to my parents' friends. This is what my parents were 30 seconds away from having happen to them.
Right. And just so if people don't know, also, Julie was put on Putin's enemies list. How many years ago? 3 years ago? This is an article from 2022. So maybe it happened before that.
No, I think it happened in 22, right when the war in Ukraine started.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I still don't know why. The way I found out that I was put on this list was because there was a article in I forgot where, like the AP or somewhere, where they said, oh, the Kremlin just released a list of about 900 people who are persona non grata, can never set foot in Russia, will be arrested the minute they set foot there. And I'm looking at the list, and it's like Joe Biden, Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense,
right.
All these senators who were anti-Putin. I'm like, and then I see Julie Roginsky. I'm like, what?
That's crazy.
It was for real. I'm like, what? Like, I was literally looking at this list, not because somebody told me I was on it. I was looking at this list just to see who they put on it, because I was curious. And the only thing I could think,
badge of honor.
It wasn't right. Badge of honor, but I'm like, what the hell? And the only thing I could think is, when I was a Fox, I would they foolishly for Fox News gave me my own show, but it was a digital show, so they didn't really pay attention to what I was saying. So I said everything I wanted to say, and a lot of times I stare straight into the camera and speak Russian to Vladimir Putin and just bash the Jesus out of him. And the Russian consulate would actually call Fox and complain. They would go on Twitter and complain, and they would call me a Russophobe, which I thought was hilarious. I'm like, I am Russian, you get that, right? But
it's badass though, so badass.
Yeah, it was pretty badass, and I found myself on this list. But now I'm thinking, okay, look, first they came for the undocumented, then they came for the green card holders, then they came for the students. Naturalized citizens are next, because Marco Rubio's comment that he made, which I'm paraphrasing, but only slightly, about this poor woman at Tufts, this graduate student who wrote an op-ed.
Yeah.
Signed into an op-ed basically saying she wasn't happy with the way Israel was prosecuting the war in Gaza, which, by the way, okay. He said, you don't have the privilege of coming to this country to stay here if you're going to trash this country. I guess she was upset that the United States was funding Israel because of their prosecution of the war in Gaza. Okay, so the next step is we don't give you citizenship in this country if you criticize this country, right? So we're taking.
I think I have the clip here actually. Let me see if I can. Why does it do this? Hold on a second. And and Marco Rubio too. I'm like, seriously, dude. Like, you of all people, like your family fled Cuba.
I know.
And Castro, and here you are, and I don't know why it's not working here. Hold on. Let me try this again. I don't know what this isn't working. Anyways, I was going to play the clip, but yeah, I mean, he says it so sternly to a group of people. Is just like, well, if you can't come here and say things against our government, or we're going to take your visa and send you back. I mean, like, it's
free speech for me and not for thee. That's the
correct. Correct. And I think he's one of the most dangerous people in the administration, quite frankly, because I mean, for somebody who gets 99 votes confirmation, which shame on the Democrats for that. I think it's abhorrent. And this is just, again, a guy who has risen in the ranks, has this great American story, and has used all of that in order to hurt other people and get more power. So in closing, I want to ask both of you, if your grandparents were alive here and here with you today, what do you think that they would say?
Anna, do you want to go? I'm having
I'm pretty sure my grandmother would have been arrested at some point. Let's just be clear. I have copies of telegrams that she sent to various presidents when she was displeased with what they did. They definitely had a file on her. I think they'd be very loud. They would be very loud. They would be they'd be at marches, they'd be writing letters, and they would be saying that this is not that the country that they love, that everybody should be able to feel safe, and that no matter what our differences are, that most people really just want the same thing. They want to have a job, they want to raise their families, they just want to live their lives. And that also that everybody can make a difference. That you should, that being quiet is a luxury that none of us should be taking right now. Everybody needs to use their voice in whatever way they can. Be an instigator. Absolutely.
Well, and just to piggyback on that, some of the people in the comments have said, oh, this is really depressing, and this is yes, this is really heavy stuff, but it's stuff that we need to know about so that we can stop it, so that we can do something about it. Because what happened then is people waited around and they didn't say anything, or not enough people said things and not enough people believed. And then look what happened. So we have the power in our hands. We have the internet, we have cable news, we have all different kinds of ways to give information and get information. And that's why this is so important, that we continue to fight back. So
we have a limited period of time, I want to say, to do that.
Yeah.
So we should not be asleep at the switch. And I'm not somebody who pulls the fire alarm, and never have been that person. I'm pulling the fire alarm now, probably for the first time in my life, because I feel that strongly that we are living in the beauty of Donald Trump is he always tells you what he's going to do. You don't have to.
And it's so brazen that almost people don't believe it. And that's the thing. It's like they don't seem to, because he's so goofy and he's so clownish that, I don't know, something about the way that he says it out loud. People are just like, well, that's Trump. That's Trump. And that's the media has given him a pass for the last 9 years for all of those reasons. And I think a lot of his voters and supporters have too, until it comes for them.
Listen, the markets went crazy today because they couldn't believe that Trump went through with his tariffs. And I'm not laughing because it's not funny, because we're all losing money. But I'm kind of smirking about the whole thing and thinking, but what part of this did you not, based on the last 10 years, think that he was going to go through with?
Right.
Because he said he was going to do it. To his credit, he does stuff that sometimes he changes his mind.
Right.
But he does it.
Right. Lutnick was on TV today saying, we need to trust Donald Trump, that he knows how to run the economy. We need to trust. I'm like, first of all, I don't know how anyone allowed you to run Cantor Fitzgerald. I don't know how anyone allowed you to run that place. Second of all, what makes anyone think that Donald Trump knows how to run anything? How many times has this man been through bankruptcy? He bankrupted 2 casinos.
You don't bankrupt a casino unless you are really incompetent. Like it literally is rigged for you to make money, and yet he bankrupted.
Right. The house always wins unless it's the Trump house, and
it's
then
almost impressive.
Yeah, it is impressive.
It is. But yeah, but Julie, what would your grandparents say?
My grandparents came here in their late 70s, and when they finally were able to come here, and so they spent their entire lives in a totalitarian society. So I don't think they knew any better, and I don't think I think they conceptually understood that this country was free, but I think their worldview, all they knew, it's like I conceptually understand that Mars is a red planet, but I don't really understand what life is like there. And if I moved there, I probably still wouldn't know what it's like.
Right.
And that's kind of what their attitude was here. So I don't think they would be surprised, because all they know is that you don't speak up against the government. The government is going to execute you if you do, or put you in prison for life, or in labor camps, or whatever else. So these were people who were deeply, deeply, deeply informed by the Russian Revolution, by Stalin. They were deeply informed by World War II, which my grandfather fought in. They were deeply informed by stories emanating from Germany, like the stories and Poland, stories that Anna's grandparents went through, which were not stories for Anna's grandparents, they were real life. So I think for them, none of this would be surprising, because of course this is how it is, right? It is surprising for me, because I was, I'll tell you a very sappy but true story. When we were flying here finally for the first time from Rome to Kennedy Airport, my father we were sitting, I remember, in the middle row, not where the windows are. he actually asked in very broken English, which he didn't really have, somebody in the window seat if he could just go try to catch a glimpse of the Statue of Liberty. Because he thought he'd be able to see it. And of course, you can't see it when you're landing at JFK for those people who but he didn't know that, of course.
Yeah, and it's so tiny.
And it's so tiny, of course, but you can't even see it
Right.
when you're landing from Europe. But he didn't know that. And I'll never forget that. He just could not wait to see the Statue of Liberty. It meant so much to him that he was free. And, you know, I think about that once in a while. I get teary-eyed thinking about this naive, kind of young 35-year-old man who had left everything behind to catch a glimpse of the Statue of Liberty because it was so symbolic to him. And from that moment, I understood that I was living in a free country, that we could say whatever we wanted to, and it was just instilled in me. So I think my grandparents would not be shocked. I'm shocked. I'm devastated in a way that I think they would never have been. So, you know, probably
it's interesting. Yeah.
Quite the opposite. And I think Anna's grandparents obviously went from hell to what they consider to be the greatest country in the world. So of course they understood, much like me, they understood why it's so important to keep it that way.
Right.
So I understand exactly why Anna's grandparents would be devastated, for the same reasons that I'm devastated. So
it's sorry, go ahead, Anna. Were you going to say something?
No, that your story and my family story, like, they're warnings. So the people, it's upsetting. Yeah, it's upsetting. Get upset and get pissed, and then do something about it. That when we talk about the industrialized genocide that was the Holocaust, like, I'm giving you the worst case scenario. I'm giving you, this is what happens when nobody stands up. And that the story of the Holocaust is not one of survival, because most people did not survive. Most Jews did not survive. Most gay men did not survive. Most, the mentally ill or with any kind of
physically disabled people too. Yeah.
Disabled people, they just euthanized. Like, they don't have anybody to tell their stories. They don't have anybody to speak for them. So it's, and we don't know, the Romani community is so close. Like, there aren't a lot of 3Gs that tell their story, that know their story. We don't even know exactly the number of how many were murdered, because there weren't proper census done on their communities. They were assimilated the way Jews were into society. So, we're a warning. Julie and I are sitting here as a warning.
And it's, sorry, go ahead, Julie.
I was going to say just one more thing for people to think about. Anna, I don't know if you ever went to Auschwitz, but I was there. And when you go to Birkenau, which is the extermination part of, it's Auschwitz too, but it's the extermination part of the camp. And you look at the bombed out, it wasn't bombed out, the Germans on their way out exploded the gas chambers because they didn't want people, they didn't want the Allies to see what they had done. But you see where the remnants of those gas chambers are. And then you look right behind the barbed wire fence, which is probably, what would you say, Anna, 50 feet, 80 feet? Yeah. There's a house. There's a fence behind the crematorium. It wasn't the gas chamber, it was the crematoria, actually. And behind that fence is a house where normal Polish people lived, who clearly had ash rained down on their roof and on their yard every day that those crematoria were working, who smelled burning flesh. And I know this is really depressing for people on a Thursday night, so have a drink.
No, it's important.
But of all the horrors that I saw when I was there, and it was by far worse than I ever could have imagined. It's the one place that actually exceeded my nightmare of what it could be. That to me was the most awful. That there were normal, regular people who lived there and continue to live there. By the way, there's still people in that house.
Oh my God.
They live adjacent to Auschwitz.
The town of Streetsam. There's a whole little town.
Yeah.
And that struck me too. And I went and my mother took me to to Poland. My grandparents, not a lot of survivors did this, but they would go back to Poland on what my grandmother called pilgrimage to always remember and have inscribed what had happened. My grandmother would not go back with me to Auschwitz, though. So I was 19 years old and I was there by myself for several hours. And I think that is the part that I found most striking, that like you're in the middle of the Polish countryside and over there so beautiful, and I turn in this direction and I see chimneys of the barracks as far as the eye could see.
It's
I say that, but though I raise that issue not to be depressing, I raise that issue to say that this happened in plain sight.
Yeah.
In the same way that what's happening now is happening in plain sight.
And we're all just going about our lives and going to dinner and doing all the things. And, you know, Anna and I worked on an ad together at my last place of employment for International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I remember we were going through a lot of the imagery and the video and the photographs that were taken of the camps and of the deceased. And I remember feeling like, we can't put that in there. That's so upsetting. We can't put that in there. It's too gory. And I remember Anna said to me, and it has always stuck with me, Michelle, no, people need to see this. People have to bear witness to what happened. And I've always thought about that since, because we do want to look away and we can't look away. We can't look away from that. We can't look away at what's happening to immigrants and migrants in this country. We can't look away from what's happening to women in this country and women who are having miscarriages and being thrown in jail. We can't look away from what is happening to Black people in this country all the time. Since the dawn of this country, racism is still well and alive here. I mean, look at this administration, the way that they're stripping our federal government from anyone they deem to not be a straight white Christian man. So we have to look it straight in the eye always. You know, of course, we all need to take breaks and keep our sanity. I think that part is very important too. I know all three of us can relate to that, but we do have to bear witness, and only then can we really do something about it. And to the people who are like me, who are white and were born here and not Jewish or Black or immigrant, it is really up to us first and foremost to be the ones to speak up and speak out, and to not be bystanders, to be upstanders, and to be the ones that show up and are marching in the front of the line for the ones who can't. So I want to thank both of you so very much for being here. I'm going to throw up a couple graphics here. This is Living Links. This is one of the organizations that Anna works with. We share the lessons of the Holocaust to shape the future. And here is a list of all the places you can follow their work and support their work. If you're listening on a podcast or on your way somewhere, it's www.wearelivinglinks.org, and all of their social handles are at wearelivinglinks. And let's see, I also have Julie's. Let's throw Julie's stuff up. She is the author of Salty Politics, which is a great Substack, and you should all subscribe. She has a great show on Thursday mornings at 11. She talks about everything that's going on with Russia. I find it to be so informative. And I also have all of her social handles here, places to follow her. It's mostly at Julie Roginsky and saltypolitics.substack.com. And then last but not least, I have the 3GNY thing here too. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Where is it? Here we go.
I would just say, if you go on the We Are Living Links site, you can also find there's 18 3 organizations across the country. So find your community.
Yeah.
3Gs, grandchildren, 4Gs, great-grandchildren or survivors, and allies.
Yes, and allies. Folks like me who just want to support and and speak up on their behalf. So 3GNY, there's as well. And then we have one more I just want to tell everybody about. Lift Our Voices, which is the organization that Julie co-founded with Gretchen Carlson that supports people who are silenced and able to share their toxic workplace experiences. You worked on a piece of legislation that was signed by Joe Biden. If you want to just,
I would say I don't have to belabor the legislation other than to say that in American Girl, before I even knew you guys, picture of that bill signing at the White House, and Gretchen's next to President Biden. I was there as well, but it is when President Biden signed the Ending Forced Arbitration for Sexual Assault and Sexual Harassment Act into law, which is a law that Gretchen and I worked on for a long time. Speak Out Act was the other that gets rid of pre-dispute NDAs for sexual misconduct. The point is, when we had a Democratic president and a Democratic House and Senate, we were able to pass laws that gave women their voices. And so it's very, very important for people to understand. We're still fighting. We're still doing it. Please join it and continue because it's very important.
Yes, these are all worthy causes for all of us to jump in and support, even if it's a like and or if it's a share of content or a story. Tell somebody you care about or you think that they'll care about it. I think this is also important. And I just want to say again, thank you both so very much for joining me. Let's see, what else can I plug here? Julie and I do a show together over it Wednesdays at noon. We also have a coffee and conversation weekend version of that, Saturdays at 10 a.m. So start your day with us on Saturday before you head out to protest. There are going to be protests happening Saturday, April 5th across the country. So if you can protest safely, please do. Please show up and have your voices heard. It's so important. So yeah, that's it. And of course, please vote for the Seneca Project to win a WEBBY. That would be amazing. And I'm going to actually close this out on American Girl. And we'll throw up the voting link again. And if you're listening, if you want to go to www.senecaproject.us, we do have a link at the top of our website, so you can go and vote there as well. And also, if you'd like to contribute or support the Seneca Project, we are a donation-based organization. Any amount of support that you can give is always appreciated. And you can go to donate.senecaproject.us. So Julie, Roginsky, Anna Scheumann, thank you both so much for being here. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Women's suffrage is a long story of hard work and heartache crowned by victory.
Was it so hard being an American girl?
Women throughout the country are committed to winning these rights for themselves.
Was it so hard living in a first problem world?
I'm Connie Chung, CBS News, New York.
When the American promise is the land of the free, but I'm waiting for the bill for the air that I breathe. Was it so hard being an American?
I do. I pray that we all remember our children are watching.
Every heart beats true for the red, white, and blue. Tell me, girls, what are we gonna do? Every heart beats true for the red, white, and blue. Tell me, girls, what are we gonna do? Every heart beats true for the red, white, and American girls. What are we gonna do? Every heart.
While I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last.
Every heart beats true for the red, white, and blue. Tell me, girls, what are we gonna do?